welcome back to the second episode of the Students of the Game podcast. I'm George Pitches, and I'm joined, as always, by my good friend and font of all footballing knowledge, Max Mahler. How are you doing this morning, Max?
I'm very well, George. How are you?
I'm good. What have you been up
Lovely.
to since the last time we spoke?
So I hate that question, George, because you know the answer. That's resounding absolutely nothing. But
I'm just trying to highlight the depressing nature of life at the moment.
There's a reason we can watch all this football.
Yeah, exactly. And it will be sad when the games are finally not all televised, because I, for one, am enjoying spending like 9 hours a weekend just sat on the sofa without moving.
Gaining weight. It's
gaining weight.
Lovely.
I finished The Sopranos. I remember we were talking about that, not in the last podcast, but before. So that's a bit of a source of disappointment for me now. There's a big Sopranos-shaped hole in my heart where Tony used to be.
I'm rationing myself quite well.
Yeah. You should do, because there are a few twists and turns coming up.
I just don't get how people can watch it, like a TV show, for 6 hours. It's just, you need to watch it in prime conditions. It has to be dark. It has to be on a decent sized screen. That's cinema. The TV show is cinema.
It's the modern form of cinema, I guess, isn't it? But we're just binging creatures these days. We want that instant gratification.
People watched it on their phones, like in their pits.
I couldn't ever do that. No, that's a step too far. But we can try and fill that Sopranos-shaped hole with a good chat about football. We can try. In the previous episode, we talked briefly about ex-Barca president Josep Maria Bartomeu, and I made a quite rash point about how Messi probably shouldn't be publicly criticising a president like that, only for that then said president to be arrested for improper management and corruption charges a few days later. So I think you were pretty right about that one.
It's a good call on my part. I think that's probably
he has been since released last Tuesday, but I think that's more of a bail thing rather than, they just found him not guilty that quickly. He was all right. So I can hold my hands up and say that as font of all footballing knowledge, you've proved me wrong there. Real Madrid also, Real Madrid also beat Atalanta. We made some kind of suspect predictions about that, although I think we came to the consensus that it was probably Real Madrid's game to lose.
And in fairness to them, they were with 10 men for so long, and it was a late minute goal from a left back.
Exactly.
I stand by our prediction, and I say, you know what, Atlanta are going to do it in the second leg.
Is that just the fairy tale speaking?
No, it's the cold-blooded truth,
the cold hard facts of it all. So we had a lot of fun doing that last podcast, and just because some of we've only got a 50% hit rate on the predictions doesn't mean that all the content, the brilliant content that you'll be hearing this afternoon or whenever you're listening to the podcast, won't be also cold hard facts. But what can we expect from this pod then, Max? What have we got to look forward to?
So we're going to try and give an overview of each league. We may fail. Then we're going to move on to Borussia Dortmund. A little bit of a focus on their fixture against Bayern Munich at the weekend.
Yep.
And to look at the general state of things in Dortmund. And then we're going to move on to Atletico. Obviously, had a big game yesterday. We'll focus on their problems and what they're doing well, what they're not doing so well. And then we're going to finish off with a little gander around all the unfashionable clubs in Europe and the relegation battles across the major four leagues.
Because there's nothing more brilliant about laughing at other clubs' misfortune to wrap up proceedings. So we're going to do a bit on the relegations. But we're trialing a new little segment, 60-second overviews, where I take two of the top four leagues and Max takes the other two, because if you remember, this is a European football podcast, although there is a bit on the Premier League today, but primarily it's for European football. And we try and dissect exactly what happened in no more or no less than 60 seconds. So do you want to kick us off with your two leagues then?
Do you practice yours?
Not in the mirror late at night. No,
I feel like I should have practiced it, got on my Shakespeare voice on and everything. But
yeah.
Okay, there's gonna be so many spelling errors in this, but let's just see if I can just sort of worm my way around it. Okay, so let's start with Serie A. So AC Milan reduced the gap to Inter Milan to 3 points after beating Hellas Verona without Zlatan 2-0. Inter Milan take on Atlanta this evening, which promises to be a stern test for Conte's men as they hope to reaffirm their stranglehold in the Scudetto. So far, so good. A much-changed Juventus side, aided by Morata double, came from behind to beat Lazio 3-1. Of course, Ronaldo did not play. Pirlo clearly thought the Porto game midweek was more important, and he's probably right.
Yeah.
Where are we? Okay. Roma and Napoli both picked up wins at home against Genoa and Bologna to keep them in the hunt for Champions League places. However, the match of the week in Serie A came in the form of a 3-3 draw between Fiorentina and Parma, featuring a goal and injury time apiece. Further entertainment this week came in a 4-2 Crotone win over Torino, and there was plenty of drama as Cagliari snatched a late 2-2 draw away at Sampdoria, courtesy of Maverick midfielder Reggie Nangolan. And breathe.
I think for someone that hasn't practiced that was pretty good going, don't you?
It's the nerves. 60 seconds of speaking is actually quite a long time for especially when you do it quite quickly. It's sort of like.
And we're obviously really religiously holding each other to the 60 seconds, at gunpoint.
Did you time me?
I didn't, but
so we don't even know.
But I already know you were bang on. We don't need the stopwatch.
Right. Let's see if La Liga is any better or any worse.
Go on.
Okay, so obviously the main fixture was the Madrid derby, which ended with the spoils being shared courtesy of a late equaliser by Karim Benzema. The big winner of that tie was actually Barcelona, who won 2-0 away at Osasuna the day before, with 18-year-old Mariba getting on the score sheet. Sevilla remained in fourth despite losing a second consecutive league match, a 2-1 defeat against Elche, which isn't exactly the ideal preparation for a win or bust tie when the North Rhine-Westphalia this coming Tuesday. Both Basque powerhouses won at home this weekend, with Real Sociedad's victory moving them to within 3 points of the Champions League places, whilst Eibar moved into relegation places following Elche's win and their defeat away in Cadiz after Alvaro Negredo, famous, the very same
man.
But yeah, his strike was the difference, and then Alaves can escape the relegation zone with a win tonight against Real Betis, and that's it.
Well, I think props to you. That was pretty perfect. Mine is by no means is flowing. I don't think, just bullet points. But yeah, so there was obviously quite a lot of drama in those two leagues, and that drama only really continued in Liga.
If you compare those results in Serie A to the Premier League, I swear every game was 0-0 or 1-0 this weekend in the Premier League, something stupid like that.
I put a tweet out the other day, which is sort of a similar thing to that. And I think we were really spoilt for choice by that period of the restart in July.
Which is crazy.
And until sort of Christmas time. And everything was like a 3-1 or a 4-2 or something.
So do you see, I think Duncan Alexander, he did a tweet and he was doing up the average goals per game in the Premier League. And they compared it, like March, I think it's like 1.52 goals.
Yeah.
Like compared to in the start, it was like 3 point something in like October, November time. So yeah,
it's crazy. And I play a Premier League predictor app, which is a bit like that. The Sky Sports Super 6, is it, where you have to guess? And then if you get points based on whether you get predictions right in the sense that the team won, or whether you get the actual score right, you get more points. So mine are all skewed now. I put everything is going to finish 3-1, even though it's like a 1-0 or something. But yeah, it wasn't that much of an interesting weekend really for Premier League content. But Liga and the Bundesliga had a bit more to offer. So I will hop into my 60-second overview now, and we'll see how it goes. So starting with Ligue 1, Lille beat Marseille 2-0 with two late Jonathan David goals, which means they remain 2 points clear at the top. It's nice to see Jonathan David finally bagging, because he's taken a little bit of time to get into things at Lille. PSG beat Bordeaux 1-0, courtesy of Pablo Sarabia, and they remain 2 points behind Lille with 10 games to go at the other end. Dijon lost their ninth consecutive game, and that was 3-1 to Brest. The last game they managed to get points from was Strasbourg, with a draw on the 24th of January. And then finally, after a strong but sort of somewhat fallen off season, Rennes have finally capitulated. They got 4 wins in their last 28 games, and they now lie 10th after a disappointing loss to Lyon, who capitalized on Monaco dropping points to a 14th place Strasbourg. So things are really hotting up in Ligue 1. It looks like If Lille can hang on, they'll end up being Ligue 1 champions, but nobody would bet against PSG to overtake them in the final few games of the season.
Huh. Do you want your time?
Yeah, go on.
You did it in 1 minute and 4 seconds. That's very good.
It's all right. It's although obviously those 4 seconds are null and void now.
Yeah, I felt like Jeremy Clarkson saying that. Like, sort of like the build up to
on their time trial or whatever it was called.
I was wondering where I was going with that for a minute. I don't
know. Okay, so the Bundesliga, I'll try and hit that bang on 60 seconds now for the Bundesliga. But Bayern win another Der Klassiker 4-2. We're going to talk about that in a bit more detail in the next few minutes. Lewandowski's 14th Bayern Munich hat-trick. Erling Haaland also scored twice to poise that game finally at the start, but Bayern Munich ended up running right full winners. Lewandowski now only needs 10 more goals to beat Gerd Muller's all-time record of 40. Leipzig beat Freiburg 3-0 away to keep the heat on Bayern. Now only 2 points separate them, so it'll be a very interesting final few games of the Bundesliga season. Mönchengladbach's poor run of form continues with a 1-0 loss to Leverkusen. I think Man City will be looking at that and licking their lips even more so than they were doing beforehand. Schalke scrape a 0-0 with Mainz. Mainz had 19 shots to Schalke's 2, but it does look like escape from the relegation zone is very unlikely for Schalke now, and also probably for Mainz as well. But as I say, we'll touch on that a bit later. And Frankfurt's 1-1 draw with Stuttgart looks very like their very unlikely title challenge, and it was only ever very unlikely, is now over because they're 12 points adrift, but they still could secure UCL football if they don't manage to bottle things in the final few games of the season. How was that one? Did you time that or no?
To be honest, I forgot to look when you started. You're about 5 or 6 seconds in, but you may have been exactly 60 seconds.
Well, that would be amazing.
Because I did an approximate saying, but I think you started at 10:45 on our time.
Yeah.
And you did finish at 11:45. So in my mind,
I'll take that.
The exact. I felt the little extra speed as you were going through it as well. I felt like you'd adjusted yourself perfectly to go from 64 seconds to that exact 60-second figure. So well done to you, George.
The proof will be in the pudding on the edit. But yeah, so let us know what you thought of that segment. We thought it was quite a nice way to sort of highlight everything that's been going on in European football at the start of the pod before we get into to the detail of things, which is next to come. But Dortmund, then, let's begin where we just left off. So Borussia Dortmund, we're going to have a little look at Der Klassiker that just happened, but also a look at the squad and how the team's been performing as a whole. So they're 6th now on 39 points, which is not quite the kind of season that they would have wanted to build on from last season. They're 16 points behind Bayern Munich, who are league leaders. And I guess quite simply, where's it all gone wrong?
Oh, that's a very, very broad question. I mean, it all went wrong when they decided to stick with Lucien Favre.
Yes.
Season after season. I mean, that's your main problem. I don't think he was ever going to quite. I mean, mentally, I think he had. I'm about to say mentally had a problem. I mean, his mentality, that was clearly a weakness to, which sort of almost gave him like a sort of like Arsenal type identity of like, being an acceptance of being second or acceptance of not quite, meeting the challenges which you need to do in order to dethrone Bayern Munich. And I think that's the main problem. And since then, it's sort of been a realisation by the board that something has to change. That's why Marco Rose has been brought in at the end of the season. Yeah. I'm not too sure yet if he's the right man. I think he might only be the right man because there's no other man that fits the sort of wage bill that Borussia Dortmund can pay and sort of has the same sort of, I don't want to say limit in terms of ambition, but I don't think someone like Nagelsmann would say, I'd go to Dortmund. And that's a bit of a
He's
problem.
very cool though, isn't he, Marco Rose?
He is, because I think he's only cool because I've never heard him speak.
He has that allure of mystery around it.
Yeah, it's sort of like I'm sure he has spoken at some point in his life. I don't want to say he hasn't, but I haven't heard him. So for all I know, he's cool, calm, cucumber-ish.
Is he still at Mönchengladbach now? Then till the end of the season,
yes,
is that how it's working?
And they've been awful since they announced his departure. They've been. I mean, they lost to Dortmund last week on Wednesday.
Yeah.
He didn't look like he cared too much. It's like, it's nice.
He was making notes on the other team. Like, what have I got to work with next season?
But it never looks good though when the caretaker manager he's been told you're not good enough to manage this team beats the incoming manager. That's
it doesn't bode well for
it doesn't,
his
but
potential future.
who knows? Maybe it will work well. And I think a lot of his success depends on what happens with Haaland and Sancho in the summer. Because I've got my gut feeling at the minute is neither of them will be sold this summer.
Yeah, certainly. They both won't go. That would be sort of career suicide, I think, for Borussia Dortmund.
They may have to sell because of Champions League. They don't get into it, but I think there'll be a. I think this is completely my own opinion. It's probably not shared by many. But I think there is a feeling that if you're going to sell Sancho for a discounted rate this year, you may as well wait a year. Yes, you only have 1 year left on his contract, but you probably get the same price anyway.
Yeah.
Because by then, it seems to me there's a bit of optimism that by next year, things will be going back towards normal. I know we said that last year, but
is there a sort of devil's advocate position to play where there's
proceed
if this downward trend that they find themselves on continues into next season and Marco Rose doesn't have the kind of impact that we hope he does, because I think we both appreciate what Dortmund are trying to do a lot of the time. And Jadon Sancho's had a fine season. He's Dortmund's second top goal scorer on 6 goals. But would it not potentially be more prudent even to cash in on him now? When
Go on, no, sorry.
Well, just when he might be able to command a kind of figure that we wouldn't necessarily see, or do you think one season's not really going to change his kind of market value?
His contract ends in 2 years' time.
Yeah,
I think it's already been established if he's going to be sold this summer, no one's going to pay the 120 million they wanted last summer because the finances have not improved in that year.
Yeah.
But I think by next year, finances of the big football clubs will be in a very different place to what they are now. In which case, 90 million, that is a sort of fee you'd expect to pay for Sancho with 1 year left his contract. So you may as well just spend that extra year with him instead of next year for that discounted price. If it's going to be the same as it is this summer, why would you give him away? Unless you really had to sell. Because he had a bad first half of the season, but since the start of 2021, he's got 15 goals and assists in 13 games.
He's definitely certainly kicked off from as you say what was quite a disappointing first half.
There's so many extenuating circumstances that he was a 20-year-old lad living in Germany, away from family and friends, and he couldn't just travel back home anytime he wanted to. He felt homesick or anything. It's a very difficult time. You look at how Kai Havertz has done since coming to England. I think there's the culture shock in it during a pandemic is quite severe.
Yeah, of course.
And he's the same year as us, I think.
It's so easy to forget that, isn't it?
We're not. I mean, we're not immature. We are sort of immature. We are very immature. And I think, how would I cope in a situation like that? I think I'd be having some roller coaster moments. I'm sure. Yeah. And I think fair play to him since 2020, start 2021. He's sort of pulled it round. He's believing in himself, and he looks like he could be competing for a Ballon d'Or in like 2 or 3 years, in my opinion.
And it's also completely impossible to produce the same kind of numbers that he was putting up last season as well. I mean, 17 goals. But
he's not actually far off those numbers even this year, despite that poor start. He's been that good in the past couple of months. He could easily, by the end of the season. Yes, he's going to be out for the next few weeks after his injury last week, but I still think by the end of the season, he could still match last season, possibly go even better if he keeps doing what he's doing.
I think it's more likely that Dortmund would sell Haaland rather than Sancho.
Because there's that problem with that release clauses.
Yeah,
this summer they could easily get double for it probably. If you're a club, you can guarantee you sign Haaland, you would pay 120, 130 million for him this year.
And Manchester City, arguably, potential front runners for his name. Although that also is assuming various different things happen, such as Sergio Aguero's departure, which hasn't been confirmed yet.
I think Barcelona said they wanted Aguero this.
Really?
I think Laporta may have said, which is it's so amusing that they've got rid of one aging South American because he's overpaid for his age, and they're gonna sign a different one this summer, just a year later after you've lost one, which has probably cost you the league title as well. And
one that's riddled with injuries as well. It's just Barcelona things.
And they're both two of Messi's closest friends. It's just Suarez is too close to Messi, you've got to get rid of him. So we'll get his other best friend instead.
Just to punish Suarez even more. So then he can be the one sat in the front seat.
It does seem a little bit personal now. Just a little bit.
But Haaland is having another phenomenal season. He's the second highest goal scorer in the Bundesliga, I believe, who he's now on, let me just check 19. In my notes. I should have seen this. 19 after his brace yesterday.
11 behind Lewandowski, I think.
Yeah.
Which makes him sound very human, but the stats are deceiving in that respect. I think he's been injured for a few games.
He has, yeah.
And Lewandowski has been fairly consistent with his goals. I think he's got 30 in 23.
I think 31 in 23 now, according to FBref.
Oh yeah, he got his hat trick in the end.
Which is crazy. I mean,
what's crazy is how much how mean he is to his former employers. I mean, he's scored at least 2 goals in each of the last 6 times they've come to visit him in Munich.
They must hate him.
I think your friend comes to visit you all those miles away, and that's nasty.
It's just a level of phenomenal goal scoring that even in the era of averaging a goal a game as an elite forward, this is something else. I think I really do hope that he beats Gerd Muller's record, purely because we all would love to see footballers breaking records. It's part of the game. And as much as I think the idea of a Ballon d'Or and an individual award for a team sport is perhaps something that isn't the most well observed idea, he was robbed of it last year, and it would be brilliant to see Bayern go quite far in the Champions League again. And well, as a German football fan, no, not for you. But to see Lewandowski lift that, because he really deserved it last year, and there didn't seem to be that logical an explanation for not giving it to him.
Well, because I think the argument was because it's given by France Football, and France Football obviously
they didn't finish
France,
their season.
And I think they have a bit of they don't realise that the league and stat is not that great in European football. So they thought, well, if we can't have it, no one can. As if a league and player was going to win it last year.
Even though PSG got to the Champions League final, it wasn't very likely ever, really, was it?
No.
But Dortmund on the whole, they have one of the lowest average ages when they play a certain, I mean, this is an interesting point to make, but when they play certain young players, they then have the youngest average age. But overall, compared to Bayern Munich, I think Bayern Munich have been averaging around 28.4 as their average age this season, and Dortmund's is at times right down at 24.7. So is it a case that they do have a lot of very, very young talent coming through, and if they can hold on to those key assets with Marco Rose coming in, who perhaps has more of hopefully more of a desire to win than Lucien Favre had, as you said, could we be looking at a Dortmund title challenge in the next few years?
Well, the things that they just seem to be stuck in this forever stage of being able just like 2 or 3 players away from we can really make a stab at it. I mean, they should have won the league 2 out of the last 3 times, in my opinion. It's only for the fact of their own collapses that they didn't, and that was a far weaker team in many ways. Like, he didn't have Haaland. Sancho's just coming through as an 18-year-old.
Yeah,
and yet it seems despite having better quality players, they just seem further away than ever.
And relying on Paco Alcácer before.
Yeah, he scored some goals.
He was all right, yeah.
Yeah, he scored some goals. He had good link-up players like Royce and Sancho. It worked quite well. Obviously, he's nowhere near as good as Haaland, which makes it all more frustrating that they haven't been able to do better this year. I do think one of the big losses at the start of the season was losing Hakimi. I think that is quite overlooked in many ways, because his combination play with Sancho in particular was really good. I think that's maybe why he struggled quite a lot, because he was playing on the right most of the time at the start of the season, and he's since been switched over more to the left because, no disrespect to Thomas Meunier, but his link-up play is very, very, very bad.
And he missed a City yesterday. Or the day before yesterday, I should say.
He did cost them, to be fair. And I think there's been a big difference since he's been playing closer to Rafa Guerreiro instead, who's more technically gifted. And they've sort of worked up that sort of repertoire of link-up play.
From an England perspective, wherever he's being utilised in a sense that he can get more of a contribution going forward, I think happy days. You mentioned Hakimi as well, and it's interesting that Borussia Dortmund are the second highest goal scorers, but they have the eighth best defensive record. I don't know an awful lot about Dortmund, but how vital was Hakimi to their defensive play as well as going forward last season?
Oh, it was not at all. Would be because he used to play 5 at the back was their main. But so this season, Thomas Munoz being their main right back, but in recent weeks you've seen Matt Murray come into the right back position more and more because he's just better technically. He's not a great defender, but he works hard and he's a more willing attacking component rather than Munoz. He just sticks. He's just so clunky. He just
I love that you're pronouncing it manure as well.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I was hoping you'd pick up on that. He's just so clunky. Just doesn't fit really at all. No. And but defensively there are big problems with Akanji and Hummels. Hummels is very slow, and Akanji is a bit clueless at times. But they've shown signs in recent weeks that they're getting a little bit better. But I still think, as we saw against Bayern, against good opposition, they will still concede lots of goals. Despite I think they played 5 at the back on Saturday, which hadn't played for a while. And despite having the extra defender, it didn't work.
Yeah, and you mentioned them just having a habit of throwing things away. And I couldn't help but think that was so true with Dahoud's challenge. It just was so unnecessary. And I know anyone can give away a penalty, but you're in a position where you've been controlling the game. Yes, they were under the cosh a little bit, but it's so rash. And I think Emre Can has that in him as well. And it's
a few players like that.
You want to see them succeed, and you want to see them push for what is, as you say, like a doable achievement. But then stupid little things like that happen, and they seem to be almost back at square one.
I think that's the first time they've lost from being 2-0 up since 1997. I think that's still a long time.
Really?
It feels like it's happened a lot. It's like one of those maybe what's it called? A false fallacy or something. I swear Dortmund must have crumbled before, but obviously they hadn't. I mean, one game sticks to them. They were falling up against Schalke and still drew 4-4. That wasn't too long ago, and that was under Favre. But I mean, the issue with Dahoud is he's been very good for the past couple of months. He has been a big part of why they've been doing well. But I mean, he got sent off on last Wednesday against Gladbach in the quarterfinal. It's just so pointless. So now he misses the semi-final, and he gives away a penalty. On Saturday. It's just mindless stuff which will cost the team. If he does it, they act like that against Sevilla, they're just going to lose. And that's the cold-hearted truth of the matter.
I've got on my notes here Yusufa Mokoku ? And I am trying to remember quite what I meant by it when I put it down. I think
question your own spelling or something there, is it?
Probably, yeah. But I wanted to just highlight him, I think, because he's one of those players that we heard an awful lot about, and he seemed to permanently be about 14 for a while. And there were tons of posts on various different sports media that I follow saying, "Oh, Yusufa Mokoku is coming through. He looks brilliant," and he finally is coming through to a certain extent now. He's got 2 goals in 12 matches played, but he's only started 2 of them with a combined 370 minutes. Is he another one of the Dortmund pipeline just to come through, or is there something special about him?
Yeah, but he's so young. He's 16 in October. It's so he's 60, your body's still developing. I think it'd be very foolish for Dortmund to give him more and more minutes. He's got to thicken out a bit. And obviously the man in front of him is Erling Haaland, so it's not exactly like he's needed to start firing on all cylinders. But he hasn't played too badly when he has come on. He has looked raw at times, as to be expected, but I think in a year or maybe 2 years, he'll be ready to start more frequently.
It's a very Football Manager-esque kind of player, isn't it? You see a promising 16-year-old and just keep chucking him in.
But the rule was changed so that he could play when he was 16 because it was felt by the German FA he's that ready to play. So he used to have to be 17 to play, but they changed the rule so that he could play, essentially.
Is that fair?
I mean, you can argue about that to the cows come home, but I mean, he would have... I don't think an extra year in the youth teams would have been a bad thing for him. I don't think...
No.
At the same time, Dortmund sort of need a second striker, so it's been useful for them to have him, even if he is not quite ready, because otherwise they play this guy from the reserves called, I think it's Tig S. He's just massive. It looks like if he wanted to quit his day job, he could probably be an Erling Haaland impersonator at parties and stuff.
Did he come on in Der Klassiker?
Yeah, he came after the 60th
Haaland went off injured, didn't he?
Sort of. I think it was pre-planned. I think.
Yeah.
Because given their injury crisis in the past couple of weeks with players like Sancho being out, Guerrero's out, Reyna's now out, they lost Haaland. Yeah.
It's all she wrote, isn't it?
Yeah, because I don't think they could just defend a 0-0. I don't think that's in their DNA.
But yeah, it didn't look like a very serious injury. I think he got caught on the Achilles heel, but
yeah, he looks all right. They said he should be right.
Yeah. So I think that's probably about it for Dortmund. I don't know if you've got any other things that you want to talk about pressing on your mind.
I think we just get out of the mind now. I think we're in the clear.
So we're going to move on to Atletico Madrid now, but we're going to have a short little break beforehand, and you can hear that lovely jingle that I found on non-copyright songs. So come back in a minute and we'll be discussing Atletico Madrid and a relegation scrap. Students of the Game podcast. Where we left off, we were just about to talk about Atletico Madrid and a few different relegation scraps / battles that are going on around Europe. So Atleti then, they just drew in the Madrid derby. Suarez scored early and Benzema scored late. They're now 3 points clear of Barca with a game in hand. It's their title to lose, surely.
Yeah, but they were so much more secure in this about 2 or 3 weeks ago.
Yeah,
I think they
were.
With games in hand, you were thinking, they could go like 10 points clear or even something higher. And they've just slowly got a bit worse. All of this happening while Sheffield had been banned, of course, because of a pretty dubious ban on the part of the FA. I won't say too much on that. But
they got 2 wins, 2 draws, and a loss in their last 5 games. That's compared to 4 wins and a draw for Barcelona, who were hot on their heels, and 3 wins and 2 draws for Real Madrid. So yeah, they were looking much more secure beforehand, and it's one of them where they're not strangers to throwing away. I think we talked about this in the podcast last time. They're not strangers to surrendering what seems to be clearly theirs and probably rightfully theirs as well. And how much longer can they be relying on Luis Suarez? Presumably for quite some time, because I think, again, we mentioned it in the pod last week that it was a very shrewd pickup and a very stupid let go from Barcelona. He's now on 17 goals, second only to Leo Messi on 19. If he avoids injuries, which is not impossible, in the sense that it's not impossible that he'll even get injured, then they really should secure what will be Simeone's second league title with Atleti. So Luis Suarez, then, if you talk to me a bit about him, because for those that didn't watch the podcast last week, there was a whole sort of political thing going on with his departure, which I don't think we talked about that much.
Yeah, it is obviously. I was trying to wrap my head a bit around this and thinking, has there been a worst sale in football this century? I just can't think of anything which sort of compares. Like, it's just nothing about it made sense. Fair enough, you gave him away to like a different country at least, but literally to the only team above you in the league now has who is probably your second best player for free.
So a rival candidate.
Can you think of anything which sort of gets anywhere near that? I just can't think of anything.
I mean, Lewandowski to Bayern Munich on a free, but he was always going to go.
Yeah.
But apart from that, probably nothing really that even compares. It is balmy. There is a chance.
Chelsea, De Bruyne get rid of him.
Yeah, that was.
But even then, he wasn't.
He went to Wolfsburg, didn't he? Rather than they didn't just give him straight to City in the sort of thing that Barca have done. I wouldn't bet against Barcelona coming back. I think it would be very, very funny if Ronald Koeman, after the start they had, suddenly transforms them into this relentless winning machine. And Leo Messi is looking quite inspired at the moment. I think he's got over that original hump he had about wanting to leave, or at least that the media were claiming that he had. Or this is at least my understanding. I'm sure you'll put me wrong if I'm incorrect on that. But he is having the best player in the world always puts you in a fine chance of doing the impossible, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, so the problem is how close Barcelona and Real Madrid are to Atletico, who are both having pretty bad seasons. Sort of, it does pose a question: are Atletico any good, or are the rest just really, really bad.
Yeah, true.
It's just because a lot's been talked about Simeone's changing philosophy this season. They've been more attacking and stuff, but they're not that far ahead of the teams in crisis, which doesn't really bode well. And I think as we saw, they got found up by Chelsea. Chelsea side, which isn't particularly great. Yes, they've been improved since Tuchel took over, but
it was only one of his first few games in charge, wasn't it? I
mean, when that draw was picked out, I think very few people just said that the Chelsea side would look a bit more streetwise than Atletico in that fixture, and that's what it looked like to me when they played, which was a bit disappointing. But
yeah, so Chelsea are taking a 1-0 lead into the second leg. I don't know off the top of my head. Is the second leg at Stamford Bridge, or is it at is it still the Wanda Metropolitana?
Or did it move out there? The first leg was at the Wanda. I hate saying that because it's a marketing ploy, but it is what it is. But yeah, it's meant to be in England the next, but I don't think it will be. I'm sure
it'll be somewhere else
in a faraway land.
Yeah. Chelsea, you briefly mentioned, they have been very defensively solid. I know we're not going to focus on them for very long, but hopefully, as you mentioned, Atleti's new kind of philosophy to attack a bit more than they were. Although I think there was a very humorous moment where they had a back seven against Chelsea in that game.
That was the old days coming good.
They could certainly try push on and steal something. They've also, I want to talk a bit about Joanne Felix and Marcus Lorente. So Joanne Felix, he's been injured a little bit. He's got 11 goal contributions in 13.4 90 minutes. This transfer he's still so young and plenty of time to grow into the player I think they hope he'll become. And he started this season very, very well. And has tailed off a little bit, but how do you feel about him? Is he worth the hype that he gets? Is that justified?
At the minute, no. He just hasn't performed very well. I think he did sign for 120 million.
Yeah,
that's a lot of money.
It's a lot of money.
I think he won the Golden Boy Award in 2019 as well, ahead of someone like Sancho. I think if you look at their career trajectory so far, I think there's a clear winner between the two. I think João Felix, I don't think he's trusted by Simeone at the moment because Angel Correa played yesterday in the derby, which, no disrespect to Angel Correa, he's a bit of a liability. And I think if you ask many Atletico fans what they think of him, it's not going to be a very positive perception of his abilities.
No.
So I think that says a lot about where João Felix is standing in that squad is at the moment, and it's not good.
It's not good, but there's still plenty of time to come back from that. I think they clearly did overpay. And I think one of the reasons they overpaid is because of the amount of promise that he was showing. It was very much we're going to buy him so nobody else can kind of thing.
Also, they sold Griezmann as well. So sort of that impulse sort of need to... He's very talented. He only had one season at Benfica where he showed his abilities. He did well. But even then, I think it was only like a half year where he just exploded onto the scene and was just scoring every week.
He scored that Europa League hat-trick, didn't he?
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden it was 100 million plus he was going to go for.
It is mental. I don't think they regret it, because I think if he does pick up as he could still be that man for Atletico for the next 5, 6, 7 years. And they could still make a profit on him in those 7 years after he's given his service.
I mean, money is both a key theme of football, but also this podcast, I might add. But is that just a sort of case of where we are with promising youngsters now? And you rightly mentioned before the pandemic and how that might affect the kind of transfer fees that we've been seeing. But it seems to be that anytime a player is showing any degree of promise now, then there are these fees that are quite laughable. And I mean, 120 million, was it 108 million?
Something like that.
Euros, I can't remember if it was euros or pounds. They're probably the same value. But that he's clearly not worth that yet. There's some argument to make that he will be. I think I watched a video not long after he'd signed for Atletico saying his and I also hate these comparisons, but I'm going to give it anyway. His numbers at the age he was when he went to Atletico, I think he was 19 or 20, were quite significantly better. This is João Felix. His numbers were significantly better than another Portuguese superstar from the past. Cristiano Ronaldo is at the same age. He's a very talented boy who potentially has the world on his shoulders, but has to Well, it's a good question. I think. What does he have to do now to improve, to get back in Simeone's good books, apart from score goals, of course?
I think it's to show more desire. I think I was very good. I hate myself even saying that. I can't remember I said it, but no, I think there's certain. Obviously, Arteta used the word non-negotiables. Well, the king of non-negotiables is Diego Simeone, and I don't think João Felix has shown enough in games that he's going to. I mean, I think he was getting the game against Leipzig last season. I think he came off the bench, and I was watching it. I thought he's phenomenal, and if you could play at that every game, conversations like this should not be happening. But clearly, he hasn't been doing that. He has struggled with injuries at times as well. But I think there's clearly things going on which are affecting his commitment to the cause, shall we say?
I think that's very nicely put. And Marcos Llorente as well. He's now got 8 goals and 8 assists in 21.1 90 minutes. In the break we just had, we discussed him briefly and how we wanted to talk about him on the pod. So there was quite a defining moment in his Atletico Madrid career coming last season, and that was because of the selection of one man in Liverpool's goal. And that was, of course, being Adrian. So do you want to talk me through that Champions League exit Liverpool's won and Marcos Llorente's impact on that game?
Yeah, so there's such a complex chain of events which have led to Marcos Llorente's emergence as some sort of playmaking god in La Liga. Like before we were looking at his stats and think he hadn't scored a La Liga goal until he arrived at Atletico. So I think he played 53 times.
Yeah,
that's insane seeing how well he's performed since. And it all started that foggy night on Merseyside when Alisson's injured and he steps up, but Adrian steps up. Oh, I can't believe it. Literally, if Alisson didn't get injured, Marcos Llorente could probably still be some sort of boring, deep-lying, dull player.
But yeah, it's 0 goals and 1 assist in 53 games. And it's that weird phenomenon that sometimes happens in football where a player is just trialed in a different position and then they realise he's
played in a
good.
lot of positions already in his career. But I've got this thing stuck in my head. Do you remember when Liverpool lost like 7-2 to Aston Villa?
Yeah.
And like someone would put on Twitter, like just before the game, like 2 hours, like the last time Liverpool conceded 6 goals was like 1923. And it's like, I don't know what year it was, but then there's just a video of Adrian just walking onto the pitch and like squash the picture. And I was like, it's this clown music. He's just dancing around like this. I put it playing in my head. Like, I've never been able to find that video since. It's been deleted for copyright somehow.
He's another one. He's probably copyright striked. He got his lawyers involved.
Yeah, he must have started some sort of legal claim against some poor Twitter user.
But just to briefly touch on Adrian and Liverpool's run of form at the moment, he's another one that pretty much had his Anfield career ruined in the space of a few months. Really, from that Champions League exit to the 7-2, it's pretty much over for him. All because of Marcos Lorente, this guy that just went and has now started going nuts. All under the tutelage of a man who is on 32 million euros a year, Diego Simeone.
We think that's what we felt was the most reliable source of information.
Max was just telling me in the break again that he's far and away the most highly paid manager in world football. I think you said 615,000 euros a year.
Yeah, that's my mathematics. So
yeah,
I do apologise. I got it wrong. I'm pretty sure I might be right.
And I was so flabbergasted by that I thought we have to include it in this section of the pod. And what have they got for that, really? I mean, they've got a title, and I think you rightly mentioned before. In fact, you didn't, of course, because it was in the break. But apart from the title, then what else had they got from Simeone?
We've got to really look at what Atletico were before Simeone came. Before they were the second club in Madrid by quite some distance, and they didn't. No one would have thought when Simeone came in charge that they'd reached 2 Champions League finals, and they did, and they could have won both of them if the god was, slightly more favourable towards them.
Yeah.
But they didn't. So, in terms of pure trophies, it doesn't look that great. But you've got to think how far the club has come in such a short space of time, because they can now afford to fork up signing players like João Felix for 120 million. They can attract a different calibre of player, which is almost unthinkable just 10 years ago.
Yeah. It's definitely a meteoric rise that they've had. those Champions League finals were heartbreaking, especially that late Ramos goal. I don't think anyone apart from Real Madrid fans wanted that to happen, and it was quite sickening, really.
And then 2 years later, penalties is no better, really.
No, I guess
you think that's the way the Atletico are meant to win a trophy.
Yeah.
A 0-0. Was it 0-0? Was it 0-0 or 1-1? No, I think it was 0-0. Griezmann missed a penalty in it, didn't he?
Yeah, he did.
I've got shivers going down my spine. I've completely forgotten all of this.
And in fact, this is something that I don't think he perhaps justifies that kind of money, but I do think managers shouldn't just be purely judged on what they win. So you're totally right about transforming the ethos of the club, the size of the club, the marketability of the club is all thanks to how they've been getting on the pitch because of his tactics and his tutelage. It's the same with Pochettino.
Yeah. But I should like to say that the club has sort of been built in his image, like his ego. It's like it's everywhere around the club. They should have won. I think in the last 2 or 3 years, they should have won at least 1, maybe 2 league titles if they'd got things right. They didn't. Yeah. They've shown. I think they've shown. Problem is, if you sack him, you have to give a bloody big payout. Secondly, if you do get rid of him, the next manager is going to be looking at what he earned, or Simeone was earning, and think,
"Yeah,
I'm worth this." Then I'm not saying they'll ask for more, but it's a rod thrown back basically if you have a manager on that much money. But the problem is, Simeone, he's so intrinsically linked to the values of the club. It's sort of you can always make the exception for him that he's more than just a coach. Like the new modern thing is
he's a leader.
He's a head. He is. He's like he's got that same sort of cult of personality that like Sir Alex Ferguson had at United, etc. And that's very different from most other head coaches.
It isn't, and being given any degree of time, let alone how long he's been there for, is rare, even in Spain.
Yeah, we should be encouraging this. This is what we want to
see.
We
should be, yeah. We shouldn't be.
Give him a round of applause.
Fair enough. Yeah, he's worth every penny.
Give him a pay rise.
But I think that's about all we've got time for Atletico. Hopefully they don't bottle it again, because there's obviously a clear argument to make that there's clearly something going pretty drastically wrong with his famed brilliance if they throw it away again. There's something in that.
Well, we're hopeful it won't happen this time.
Yeah, so watch this space on the front of Atletico Madrid. But relegations, then, everybody's favourite topic. We're going to look at the Bundesliga relegation battle, the Serie A relegation battle, a bit on the Premier League, and I think perhaps if we've got time, some on Liga as well.
But La Liga, we'll do them all.
And La Liga, yeah. We'll put them all in. So, Max, the Bundesliga, how do relegations work in the Bundesliga? Because it's a little different, isn't it?
Well, it's quite an interesting format. It does heavily favour teams already in the league.
Yeah.
And I think it's almost like the dystopian future the Premier League wants, because they want to secure their places in the top division. So there's 18 teams in the league, 2 automatically go down. The third bottom team plays the third best team in the second division. And if you look at history, very few teams actually lose that. The last to happen was Union Berlin, my beloved Union Berlin, just a couple of years ago. Before that hadn't happened for a very long time. So yeah, it does heavily favour teams already in the league.
Yeah. Union Berlin are 7th, aren't they now? Just as a sort of tangent.
I think we might be 8th now because we drew 0-0 yesterday. Hang on, let me have a look.
To Armenia, wasn't it? Who are funnily enough, or Arminia, who are funnily enough in a relegation battle themselves.
Yeah. I know we're in 7th. So at the minute we could qualify for the Europa League conference,
which is amazing. Yeah.
Away days in Slovakia, Serbia. Wow.
You deserve it, to be fair. I think years of being an Union Berlin fan has not been particularly kind.
It's been actually quite fun. You have no expectation.
Yeah. Well, same with Burnley, I suppose.
Yeah.
Every win is cherished. But anyway, so Mainz, Schalke and Arminia look like the most likely candidates at the moment for relegation. Obviously, there's still some time left in the season. But I wanted to have a little look at Schalke in particular, because it wasn't that long ago, in 17-18, I think, that they finished second, and now they have 10 points all season. So what's happened there? I mean, they've lost Leon Goretzka. I think they had Bergstaller, I've put in my notes, who was their top goal scorer that season, who then pretty much stopped scoring and left. But what else do you think has changed around Schalke that mean they are so bad now?
Well, for a start, the managers seem to be changing with every passing month. I think they're looking for, they may have just secured the 6th manager of the season.
Good grief. Is it that many?
Yeah, that's like something you'd hear from like an Italian third division who's like owned by some sort of fascist sort of like car dealership owner. Like it's absolutely
very
absurd.
specific there.
Yeah, no, yeah. I was just trying. I had a few people in mind. I sort of wanted to, avoid, destroying their personality or their image. But yeah, so Schalke things have been. I mean, it sort of mirrors the Hamburg situation quite disturbingly well. Massive club. I mean, Schalke, in terms of numbers, are the most supported club in Germany.
Is that right? I didn't realise that.
I'm pretty sure. I'm sort of doubting myself, but I remember.
Well, if you say it with enough conviction, and people won't doubt
conviction is key. But yeah, they're a massive club, and it's just gone wrong so quickly. Because even last season, they were like at Christmas, they were 4th or 5th.
Yeah.
And then it just went horrifically the rest of the season, and it just didn't stop. I think it was 30 or 31 games in a row they failed to win, and then
it's appalling, isn't it?
It was a record previously still held by Tasmania Berlin, who were desperate to hold on to their record because it was the only thing which got them sponsors, which is just incredible that I'm glad it happened though. Glad they didn't take the record away.
They obviously replaced the outgoing manager with who for the life of me I can't remember his name, with the old Huddersfield manager, didn't they? David Wagner.
Oh, so it's Tedesco then Wagner, I think.
And Wagner coming off the back of a very, very disappointing season with Huddersfield.
And he was also a former Borussia Dortmund youth coach as well, I think.
Really?
Just to add to
he's public enemy number one.
Well, yeah, it's
in the Ruhr.
A bizarre one.
They look nailed on to go down.
Yeah, they're not staying up.
What do you think of their chances to come back? In fact, talk to me a little bit about that, because it's very difficult in the Premier League, which is the league that, funnily enough, hosting a European football podcast, I know much more about the Premier League than one league that we're not actually covering than I do about the rest of it. But in the Championship, getting relegated and then coming back up to the Premier League is something that's not done very often. Is that the same in the Bundesliga?
Well, if you look at Hamburg, they were relegated, I think 3 years ago, maybe 4. I think it was 2016-17 they went down. It might have been the year after. And they've struggled to come back up. They seem to, every time they get close, they always seem to do something stupid, which costs them in the end. Yeah. Like at the minute, they're still in the mix. They could go up again this year, but knowing their track record, it might not happen. It's a very easy league to sort of just get stuck in. It's like that in so many second leagues. It's like the Championship in England is very difficult to get out because you get that playoff. It just makes it very hard. I do wonder if Schalke, when they go down, they'll just sort of crumble a little bit. There is great.
There is an argument, as you say, if they are the most supported club, that they have that infrastructure and that fan base to perhaps come back. It would be very unlikely, for lack of a better word, to see a club of that size go down. Well, it will be very likely in the sense that it is probably going to happen now, but you wouldn't have necessarily thought that massive clubs with history and stature,
especially after happened to Hamburg, I think there's an expectation this is once in a lifetime sort of thing. A massive club like this isn't going to. But I'm not too sure on their financial situation. They've been sponsored by Gazprom in the past, who I'm sure is quite a wealthy thing, but I'm not sure what's happened there. And also, I think they've had a few issues with I think their either owner or chairman or something like that was I think he said a few racist things. I think it's been a bit of a decline since then. So there's definitely been a moral decline, and now we're seeing a decline on the pitch.
Very, very nicely put. Mainz have just lost their top goal scorer, Jean-Philippe Mateta, to Crystal Palace. I saw that when I was making notes for this podcast. I don't know if you know much about that, but are they in financial trouble? Otherwise, why on earth would they do that?
That's the only assumption I could make, is that
he was only on 7 goals, but to sell your leading goal scorer when you're in a relegation scrap is nothing if not.
So it wasn't. It was. I think, what was it? A loan with an obligation to buy.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Mainz won't get the money straight away. They have to wait. Yeah. What, 6 months? Or was it 18 months? I'm not even sure.
I don't know the intricacies.
So it can't be a need for a short-term injection. There must be some sort of planning there. But how have they done since? I didn't check their results, but not great is my
I wouldn't have. Probably not very great. I think they did. Yeah, because it was well as 1-0 with Schalke, wasn't it? And they definitely should have won that game. I think we briefly mentioned they outshot them.
If only had a striker to score.
If only they had a striker to score those chances. In fact, yeah, they had 19 shots, I believe, with only 2 on target. So
it's almost like you shouldn't sell your striker in your relegation battle.
Exactly.
Who
would have thought, eh? So that's enough on the Bundesliga. We'll move on to Serie A, and we'll briefly touch on that. I think you talked about wanting to mention Torino at one point.
Yeah, so it's quite a controversial situation developing.
Yeah. In what sense?
So Torino were meant to travel to Lazio midweek for a fixture because the local it's your local authority who decides where you can't go there, you can't X, Y, Z.
Right.
So they have the right to essentially block teams from travelling to different regions.
Is this because of coronavirus restrictions?
Yes, all because of coronavirus. It's happened before in the season, early on in the season, because Napoli were meant to play Juventus. They didn't travel, so they got deducted a point, and Juventus were ordered the 3 points. They've since appealed it, and it took 3 months later they've come to a decision they'll replay the match, which is the right thing to do. It's now happened with Torino, but yet for some reason they're still going for this process, saying you've lost a point. Lazio gets awarded the win. It's just absolute madness. Why?
That's very
the central body of Serie A cannot just make the decision. Right, it's not your fault you can't go. We'll work around it. We'll find a date for it.
Yeah,
it just doesn't really bode well for the league. So yeah, at the minute Torino are in 18th place, I think. If I just check the table,
they are 18th, and
that point has dropped them in there by losing a point and not being able to play. Has dropped them in. They've got 2 games in hand, but they're now 2 points behind Cagliari, who are in 17th.
Yeah.
So imagine if that was the point which could be set them down.
It's shades of that Villa goal, wasn't it, or the goal that wasn't? Against Sheffield United.
Serie A is not exactly known for its fairness in terms of it's had a few scandals in the past. This would probably take the biscuit.
Yeah. They just had a very disappointing loss, didn't they? I think you talked about it in your overview at the start.
It's the basement club.
Is it Crotone?
Crotone.
4-2. Not the kind of result you want against the team that foot the league. But they do have these 2 games in hand. Cagliari, I don't know an awful lot about, I must confess. Have they been relegated recently, or are they sort of established in the league?
I think they started last season really well. I think because they got Reginan Golan back. He played there previously. And I was quite excited to see what that team could do, and it turned out not very much was the answer. And this year it's been pretty bad. And they're not looking too great, despite having Naglan. I think Simeone's son might still play there. We may have left now. He was there at least on loan. I'm going to check it because I'd like to be right.
Well, while you check that, I want to highlight an interesting trend. He is still there.
Yes.
There's an interesting trend that I saw in the Serie A, the relegation candidate teams, and by that I'm talking about Cagliari, Torino, Parma, and Crotone at the moment. There are obviously Benevento's in and around there as well. But 3 of those 4 clubs, Cagliari, Torino, and Crotone, have strikers in the double figures. And that then again isn't the case until you get up to Hellas Verona in 8th. So a lot of their firepower is coming from the same players. Do you think that they're placing a sort of over-reliance on these guys, or is it more of a case that? Well, I think it's probably quite obvious, isn't it? They're relying too heavily on some players and not getting the rest out of the ones that they should be performing as well.
Yeah, well, I think it's quite clear. If you want to stay up, don't sign a striker that can score goals. You want as few goals as possible. You score by a striker.
Well, this is what I mean. It seems weird. It seems
it's
like
it's too weird to be a coincidence.
Yeah. And like this, Joan Pedro for Cagliari has got 13 goals. That's up there with a decent return, top 10 returns, or even top 7, just off the top of my head. Looking here, returns in the league, and they're 18. Sorry,
Belotti. What about Belotti?
Belotti. I wanted to talk briefly about Andrea Belotti.
He's cool.
He is very cool. He obviously had that incredible season in 2016-17 where he scored 26 goals, one of the leading top goal scorers in Europe that season. I remember watching a video, I think it was by Football Daily when I used to watch them, and they talked about how if there was a time to sell Belotti, it would have been then. But of course, why would you sell a guy who just banged in 26 goals for you? And the reason I wanted to bring up Belotti is because I think it highlights an interesting trend with relegation candidate teams, that there's a lot of value in those squads. Now, Belotti's a guy that's got 94 goals in 205 games for Torino, and yet they're potentially going to go down. And if they do go down, in the same way that if Cagliari go down, then you've got a striker there that can score 15 goals in the top flight. And it would be interesting to see where the rest of Europe's clubs do their shopping if we're seeing players like Andrea Belotti get relegated.
Well, there's bargains to be picked up there. I think João Pedro's in his 30s now, so I'm not sure.
Yeah,
where his next destination
he's a poor
is,
example.
But Belotti's 28, I think. 28. He's in his prime, and I think that'd be a fantastic sign for someone slightly higher than the table. If you're someone looking to push for the top 6, Belotti's your man, especially if they go down, because he'll be available for a lot. If he doesn't stay, it's difficult to say because he's the captain. I think he's local, so there may be some sort of pull on the heartstrings and say, "No, what? I'm going to get us back up." But I'm not too sure. I think he's on decent money for where he's at as well. So to keep him there for so long, they sort of said, "Look, we'll pay you a handsome sum."
There are some arguments as well about how players' contracts change when they get relegated. I don't know anything about his current situation.
I'm not too sure. We'll have to research that a little bit.
I remember when Johnny Evans got relegated with West Brom, his release clause dropped to 5 million. Or 3 million was it, when and Leicester picked him up. So it'll be interesting. We'll be watching that situation closely. Premier League now, very briefly. Fulham beating Liverpool 1-0, which as a Burnley fan and also as a Football Manager fan, as a fantasy football fan, that was something that hurt me an awful lot with my captain's armband on Mo Salah. And not deciding to captain Harry Kane, who then went and got 2 goals and 2 assists later on. But we don't talk about that because it's frustrating enough. So Fulham playing very, very well. I don't know if you watched that game over the weekend.
Yes, I watched the first hour before the Madrid derby, and it was Fulham could have had 3 or 4. They didn't dominate. The worrying thing is they didn't dominate the first half. They didn't have to, but they still could have scored 3 or 4. Just literally get behind Nico Williams every time he wanted. It's just so poor. And I think they didn't even particularly target Nico Williams. They had very little intelligence to say that he would have started. That was just their game plan anyway. You get between the fullback and the centre half, and you'll be in every time.
The massive gulf in quality between their normal defensive lineup and the one that they ended up with yesterday was very clear. I think it seemed bizarre just how high up Reece Williams and Nat Phillips were playing yesterday.
It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And the problem is the injuries to Van Dijk. Yes, they've been awful, but you can make an argument. But the start of the season, they did look shaky at the back, even before Van Dijk was getting injured. There was probably
you mentioned the 7-2, rightly, didn't you?
That 7-2. History will forget that happened with Van Dijk in the central defence. They've been very poor defensively for most of this season, and it's fallen off a cliff since then, obviously. And it makes no sense why you can play Nat Phillips and Reece Williams in such a high position. You're just asking for trouble. And what's that going to do to their confidence?
Exactly. I mean, if it's not shot to pot already, it certainly will be now. There was a great piece in The Athletic highlighting why it's so important that Liverpool play with a high line, because the higher the line, better possession in the second half, higher pressing, turnovers, yada, yada. And that's how Liverpool like to play football. But that only works if you have a Van Dijk or a Gomez who's strong and who's fast enough to get back when inevitably the ball goes over the top. And when you're playing Phillips and Williams, they just kept getting exposed. And I felt for Nico Williams because he didn't have that bad a game, but they kept getting in behind on that right-hand side. And I think he was being asked to get forward a lot because he constantly found himself in crossing positions, and his crossing left a little bit to be desired. He almost set up Diogo Jota. But they're in crisis, Liverpool, really now. And
I love how our relegation
it's just turned into a focus on Liverpool.
Have a go at Liverpool, and I love it. I absolutely love it. I got to feel bad for them because they were so good for so long, and now they're so bad. It just seems an eternal drop.
It does. But I will hold my hands up and say fair play to Fulham. If any, Liverpool have now lost 6 straight home games. So if ever there was a time to beat them, it would be now. But they look good.
So we think we tip with them to stay up. Must do now, surely.
Yeah, over Newcastle. I think Newcastle
that'll hurt.
Really poor again. West Brom, and another game we're about to mention. West Brom and Newcastle finished in, unsurprisingly, a 0-0.
The less the better, I think, on that.
And I think it's very likely with Southampton beating Sheffield United 2-0, though Sheffield United are arguably down and out already. It will look like it'll be West Brom, Newcastle, and Sheffield to go down. I'd put a tenner on if I was a betting man.
But we're not.
But we're not betting men. We don't just tell others to bet instead.
Betting. Yeah, that's your money, not mine.
Finally, I think we're going to have a little word about Ligue 1 relegation as well. If you've got anything to say on that.
To be honest, there's not much. There's not much happening in Ligue 1 relegation.
No,
it's very boring.
Dijon are awful.
Yeah, Dijon, was it 9 in a row? You said.
Yeah, 9 in a row.
Losses. I mean, to be fair, I'd say Nantes. That's how you say it. Nimes, Lorient. They're looking in a bit of trouble. 2 of those 3 are probably going to go down, and you've got Saint Etienne just above 3 points ahead, which they've got a bit of breathing space. I think they'll be all right. La Liga is a little bit closer. I think it's quite close, to be fair. Let's just have a little gander. Yeah, so there's only 5 points splitting 16th and 20th. So it's all to play for there, and you've got a couple of teams with games in hand, so that could be interesting.
Was it Eibar that had a great season recently, or have I made that up?
Yes, I think they came mid-table, like the season before last, I think.
Yeah, and now they look like potential relegation fodder.
I mean, they are on a very small budget, Eibar.
Yeah.
And that's the team Michu was signed from Swansea. For £2 million. Yeah.
There you go.
Hang on, I could be wrong. I think I got it wrong.
Well, I'm going to pretend while you're checking that you've got it right, and we can revel in.
Yeah, no, I've got it wrong. Okay. It's very
Ignore me. But yeah, so it's Huesca, Alaves, and Eibar all look like potential relegation teams. You mentioned Elche and Valladolid.
Talk to me more, George.
The less consonants you mention and just sort of go then it sounds like you know what you're talking about.
It gives me like this podcast we can insult so many different people purely not even on purpose. That's the best part.
In fact, I think I pronounced it wrong anyway. I think it's Valladolid, not Valladolid.
Yeah, Valladolid. Should have got some like translators on to help us.
We should have done.
Like some commentators, they'll message the consulate of the country they're commentating on to make sure they're getting every name right. I think that's Derek Ray who does that.
Is it?
Yeah, the guy of the FIFA.
Yeah, I don't mind his commentary. Though he's quite annoying on FIFA when I was playing that recently.
He's so good at pronouncing names, though. So fair play to
Bruno Fernandes. He likes that one.
Fernandes.
So relegation is interesting. I think around top 5 leagues. It's still all to play for. Arguably, I think the Premier League, which has this reputation of being the most exciting league in the world, is probably, in terms of relegation, the most boring league in the world at the moment.
And the league as well. The league title looks pretty dead.
The league title looks boring.
What a rubbish league.
What a rubbish league, eh? Yeah. That's why you listen to the Students of the Game European Football Podcast, because we bring you all the best news from Europe. I think that's about all we've got time for. This podcast has been a little bit longer than our other ones. If you do, as always, have any suggestions for things that you want us to talk about in the next few episodes, then feel free to let us know in the comments below on YouTube. I'm going to try and sort out getting them on Spotify. I think we were talking about before, weren't we?
We don't know how to do it, so
we don't know how to do it, but I'm sure we can work it out, because it's always fun when you're going on your 30 minutes of state-sanctioned exercise at the moment. You can put us in your ears while you run around and listen to us chat and hear our voices. But apart from that, thank you very much for listening to the second episode of the Students of the Game podcast. Max, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much for spending the last hour and a half with me.
No problem. Anytime.
And
not anytime.
A very specific Monday afternoon.
Yeah, very specific time.
Yeah. So thank you very much for watching, and we will see you in the next episode of the Students of the Game podcast.